Nintendo's GameCube system is about to hit the stores, but some lucky people are already playing the games.
But Sony PlayStation 2 and Microsoft's new Xbox also expected to be big hits this year.
The gaming landscape is changing with new business models and new ways to play.
There's a few genres that quickly come to mind when I think about some of my favourite games. Third-person action adventures have always been an opportunity to explore beautifully detailed environments, full of little secrets and pockets of lore hidden away for you to discover, with some providing the same level of narrative that were once reserved only for big-budget Hollywood blockbusters. Whether it's the witty running commentary of Nathan Drake providing moments of relief from a story of betrayal, secrecy, but eventual triumph, or the soul-crushing loneliness and inevitable violence that will stalk you through your time with Joel and Ellie. The drip feed of adrenaline that locking into a first-person shooter can provide, with fast-paced movement and slightly too aggressive callouts from the squad.
You're a disappointment to your parents, who I fuck.
Or, more recently, the incredible gameplay loops, mechanics, and unique stories that indie developers are providing thanks to changes in how games are both made and distributed. There's always something to look forward to in any given genre, regardless of your preference. And even if there's nothing coming up that you're immediately interested in, there's a huge catalogue of safe bets that have been building over the last few decades. But of course, if you've spent any time on the channel, you know exactly what's coming. And that's the fact that I can't talk about my favourite games without bringing up 3D platformers. It's a relationship that's been building ever since 4-year-old me first got my grubby little mitts on my very own copy of Super Mario 64, igniting a love for everything a game like that included. Crazy characters, unique and ever-changing environments, awesome and interesting movesets, the ability to spend as long as you want exploring every inch of a given level, and most importantly of all, straight up fun. Since then, I've spent countless hours with games that have stuck with me to this day. Crash, Spyro, Ratchet, Sly, Jak, Banjo, Conkers, and Raz. All of these characters and their corresponding games have been integral parts of my little gaming journey. But I feel like whenever 3D platformers are brought up, it's always in the context of looking back on them. Remembering the games we grew up with before the genre was pushed aside to make way for the innovations and experimentation that were happening within the industry. And for a while, that was indeed the case. Studios were retiring their mascots to focus on more realistic and grounded characters, environments, and storylines, leaving our anthropomorphic besties to exist only as Easter eggs and throwback references within those new games. But I'm incredibly happy to say that we have in fact seen a new lease of life within the genre lately, with brand new characters and exciting new games releasing over the last few years. Whether it's due to developers growing up with the same games as we did, wanting to create a little more of that magic, or studios simply seeing the gap in the market, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 3D platformer revival. Just a little side note very quickly, but we won't be taking a look at any existing franchises in this video. There's going to be no ports of old games to new hardware, no reboots, remasters or collections, and no sequels to older games despite how long the gap in between them was. These are all going to be brand new games and characters making their debut into the world of 3D platformers. Also, naturally there will be spoilers for a few of the games throughout this video, so if there's any you'd prefer to go into blindly, use the chapter markers below to avoid any you're planning on checking out for yourself. Finally, with all of that said, sit back, relax, grab yourself a snack, and join me as we take a look at the 3D platformer revival. When delving into the world of 3D platformers, you'll quickly realise they come in various flavours, each with a unique focus. Whether it prioritises movement mechanics like Super Mario 64, is a more traditional collectathon like Spyro, faster paced with a heavier focus on combat like Ratchet & Clank, or even an emphasis on its narrative and visuals like Psychonauts 2. Still one of the best looking games of all time, by the way. With all the different directions you're able to take the main focus of a game, I'm always a massive fan of good movement. If you can just make your character fun as hell to control, everything else becomes a lot less important. Obviously, great visuals, fun level design, awesome music, good voice acting, and even an intriguing plot are going to elevate the game a great deal. But if you can build a strong foundation with fun movement, then plop me into the middle of a level with a few obstacles to tackle in a bunch of different ways, then I'm going to be more than happy. So you can imagine my excitement when I first laid eyes on Demon Turf. A fast-paced 3D platformer with a massive emphasis on its movement mechanics, super unique art style, and a big old punch of that 90s throwback, too cool for school attitude to match. Demon Turf's developers for Braz Studios stated they'd already done everything they wanted to in the 2D platforming space with Slime San, so instead decided to see what they could achieve with a whole extra dimension. Demon Turf released for the usual suspects in 2021, being published by Playtonic Friends, a branch of Playtonic who I'm sure you're aware consists of a bunch of ex-Rare employees. We'll join a young demon girl, Beebs, who's fed up with a demon king taunting her in her dreams, so decides the best course of action is to dethrone him. I mean, personally, I'd probably try a few benzodiazepams before trying to 1v1 the Lord of Darkness himself, but that's just me. To take him on, we're first going to have to make our way through 4 turfs, these being different themed hub worlds, all containing a number of levels you'll need to complete to earn a battery. Each turf also contains a unique boss we'll need to then conquer before moving on. Once we've collected 50 batteries, we're going to get the chance to take on the Demon King himself and get our butts on that throne. It's an incredibly simple plot as to be expected, but we all know that's really not why we're here anyway. Before getting into the gameplay, I wanted to touch on the visuals, being one of the main reasons this game first got my attention to begin with. As you can see, Demon Turf takes a unique approach to its visual style by combining 2D sprites and characters with 3D environments, and I really love the effect that it produces. It gives everything this sort of hand-drawn, cardboard cutout vibe, and when that's combined with the bold, blocky colours of the first hub world and its levels, it all fits perfectly with the bold but playful personalities of the characters themselves. The visual style isn't going to be to everyone's taste, and I did see a few comments online of people saying they really didn't like it, but personally, I think they handled it really well, and I really do like it a lot. My only real concern with it was when making my way through the first turf, basically everything is different shades of red, which I thought may continue throughout the game with it all being based on demons and hell and all that jazz. But then you arrive at the second turf and you're greeted by this incredibly bright tropical world with blue oceans and luscious green forestry. They also introduce a few different visual styles here too, with more realistic water and lighting, and it just makes everything pop so much more. This was by far my favourite turf, both visually and in terms of the level design, but we still get a couple of other unique environments and colour palettes through the different turfs too. The third being a purple neon city, and the fourth a snowy mountaintop. And then there's the standalone DLC Neon Splash, which takes the vibe from the second turf and pushes it way further. But we'll touch on that a little later. So it's all well and good having some cool environments to make our way through, but how does traversing them actually feel? Well, for the most part, it's awesome. Beebs can jump, wall jump, side flip, and punch, kind of, as well as transform into a few different creatures that will aid our movement too. Transforming into a bat will allow us to double jump by default, but we can get an extra jump by buying and equipping a specific badge for it. We can also turn into a spinning top with the left trigger that will allow us to float in the air for a short time, extending our jump distance but also slowing our descent, which makes platforming across smaller platforms a lot easier. We can also jump, spin, and then jump out of that spin to perform a super jump covering a huge distance, which very quickly became my most used move. You combine these moves in a number of ways to traverse over different obstacles, like side flipping into a double jump or even side flipping into a wall jump into a super jump. It's really up to you how you tackle each of the different platforming obstacles you'll face throughout the levels. I was a little worried the 2D sprite of Beebs would make trickier platforming more difficult by creating depth perception issues, but it really doesn't. Beebs always has a shadow under her, so it's easy to see where you're going to land anyway. The movement may take you a level or two to get used to, and at first you're going to get frustrated. But then you'll start learning how to implement the moveset correctly and things will get easier. And then you'll get good at it. And that's where most of the fun in Demon Turf stems from. Chaining together a bunch of your moves to blast your way through obstacles that would have overwhelmed you just an hour or so ago feels incredible. The satisfaction you get from flawlessly bouncing your way around the environments or from overcoming a trickier section that was giving you a little grief is second to none. And it all fits perfectly with the shorter level length that basically encourages a speedrunning approach. You're going to use two different tactics for each level really, the first of which is your first trip. This will see you making your way through the level at your own pace, searching for each of the 3 collectible cakes, getting a feel for the level's layout and obstacles, and not worrying too much about how long it's taking you. Then you can go for the trophy time. This will need you to blast your way through each level to beat a predetermined time. not worrying about anything else other than speed.
Remember,
Think of it a bit like the relic runs in a Crash game. And this is where the game is at its best. You have so much freedom with your movement, and the trophy times are like a test to see how confidently you can now control beeps. Unfortunately, this is also where my issues with the game start to affect things. Like I've mentioned, the game and its controls provide you with the freedom to approach things how you want. But then they put some really weird restrictions on that freedom that not only don't make much sense to me, but actively go against what I thought was the main focus of the game: fast-paced, flowing movement. Just for a few examples, during some of the later levels you're introduced to different platforms. Some will crumble or start dissolving when you stand on them, some of them will make you slide around like ice, some are super bouncy, and some super sticky, meaning you can only jump when stuck on them but not walk or run. They use these sticky ones on walls, needing you to jump between them to climb your way up that wall. But all of these sections just felt unfair and super bullshitty. If you don't hit it at the right angle, you won't stick, and I would just end up rolling down the walls over and over again.
This is #1 bullshit.
These sections just became incredibly frustrating because it felt completely unfair. Every other section of the game I failed felt like a mistake on my part, a chance to learn from what I was doing wrong, practice, and then implement improvements from that failure. But with these wall sections, that just wasn't the case. It really felt like a coin flip on whether you'd end up sticking or not. For another example, you're going to get access to 4 different abilities throughout the game, always being supplied to you before each of the boss fights. These are a grappling hook, a Sonic-styled wheel spin, a glide, and lastly the ability to slow time. But these 2 end up creating their own little weird set of restrictions. The grappling hook can only be used on specific points that are placed through the levels. But again, if you've transformed into the bat to double jump, you can't then use your grappling hook, meaning you'll end up double jumping out of muscle memory and falling to your death way more than you should. Same thing with the glide. Once you've entered that transformation, you lose access to all of your other moves. And most annoyingly of all, you're also propelled forward when exiting that form, which would end up just shooting me off whatever platform I managed to land on. I just wish the different forms were used as an extension to our base moveset instead of a temporary replacement of it. It's a shame to have a game that gives you so much freedom with such a heavy emphasis on its movement, then also put some really odd and frustrating restrictions on it that honestly didn't need to be there. Every obstacle that needs you to use an ability are only there to warrant the inclusion of the abilities to begin with, rather than your new forms being a way to tackle the same obstacle in a new or faster way. While we are touching on things that didn't need to be here, the combat. It sucks. Beebs has both a quick attack and a charge attack, both of which are like an air punch that, rather than damaging an enemy, will either reflect their shots back at them or push them into the spikes that are dotted around any of the combat areas. The combat is always restricted to a small area that you'll need to complete to then unlock the next section of the level. And although there's not a massive amount of encounters, they never added anything to the game at all. I never really felt pissed off with the combat, but it's just pretty boring and slows down the pace of the game, which again, seems to go against the core of the gameplay. Right, that's my little bitch out of the way, so I did at least want to bring up another thing that I did really enjoy about the game, even though it seems to be its most controversial: the checkpoint system. You're given 3 checkpoints per level, but like our double jump, this can be extended to 4 with the use of a badge, and you have the freedom to place these wherever you see fit. This introduces a really nice risk-reward factor to the game. You might have just made your way through a tricky section that you really don't want to do again if you die. But what if you use a checkpoint now and end up getting to an even trickier section later that you needed to save a checkpoint for? It's a really cool system, and even though there were a few instances of me forgetting to place any checkpoints and then dying near the end of a level, that was always on me and only reminded me to make sure that I was placing them. You can also warp to checkpoints at any point and even between each of the ones that you've placed, which can be super handy for searching for collectibles. You can even place a checkpoint right next to the level exit and then backtrack for any missed collectibles, meaning you don't have to replay levels looking for just 1 or 2 of them. There's a load of things I've yet to touch on with Demon Turf, but the truth is, your enjoyment of this game will depend heavily on how much you enjoy that base movement. You get a lot of game for the money, with each of the levels having a return trip version that will completely change the level's layout and obstacles, all having their own batteries and collectibles for you to sniff out, as well as yet another trophy time doubling the level count. but my advice would be to check out Neon Splash at the very least. It's a standalone DLC that, due to a small team, did only release on PC and Switch, but they made a few changes that fix a lot of my issues with the base game. It looks amazing, and all of the levels are these super bright and colourful environments, and although I do get why a lot of Demon Turf's original levels are a little more subtle with their colour choices, Neon Splash really does look incredible to play through. Secondly, they got rid of the 4 abilities and instead just give you access to the super roll and the dash from the start, which make a lot more sense just being a part of your default moveset. And then lastly, they did away with the combat and instead, you just use your spin to break crystals for collectibles. I really wish this is the approach they took with the base game and either did away with combat completely, or at the very least, made all of the enemies one hit that you can just use your spin on. It would have made a lot more sense to keep the pace of the game up, keeping the focus on just platforming as opposed to you stopping in place to slowly push a few enemies about before actually getting back to the fun. The only issue with Neon Splash is due to its smaller size, the difficulty increases at a much harsher rate. I honestly struggled a lot with the section in only the 4th level, so I'm guessing someone who hasn't just played 20 hours of the base game and got comfortable with the controls would struggle a little bit more than I did. But even though the difficulty ramps up, so does the satisfaction when finally overcoming a section that you've been struggling with. The improvements they managed to make between the base game and Neon Splash are really awesome to see, and only make me more excited to see what they can do with the next game. Whether that's a follow-up to Demon Turf, or an entirely new wacky cast of characters. All in all, I would still recommend checking out Demon Turf if you're a fan of the genre. I still really like a lot of what it does, but I just think that's why the issues are a little more frustrating to me. I love the freedom that we get with the moveset, I love the visual style, I love the music, and just the vibe the game gives off is super endearing. There's just a few annoyances along the way, and how much patience you have for those issues are going to be the main factor in how much enjoyment you get from this game. At the very least, if you can, check out Neon Splash to see if you're up for taking over some turfs and putting an end to the Demon King once and for all. TinyKin was one of my most anticipated games of 2022, and a rare case in which a game managed to live up to the inflated expectations my own excitement had caused me to put on it. I can't remember exactly where I first seen it, but I can remember immediately going over to Steam, delighted to see a free demo just waiting for me to dive in. I spent 2 or so hours completely engrossed in this intricately crafted world, traversing, exploring, and completing everything I possibly could. Immediately adding it to my wishlist and patiently waiting for the day that I could check out the full release. That day would come at the tail end of August, put out on all major platforms after development by a small French studio, Splash Team. In a way similar to that of Demon Turf's developers, Splash Team had previously completed work on their first game, a colourful 2D platformer, Splasher, before adding in that beautiful third dimension and bringing TinyKin to life. The game is described as a puzzle platformer, and we'll see us taking control of Milodane, a palm-sized protagonist travelling through space seeking answers to his own origin, only to find himself stuck on planet Earth, but now as a tiny little dude with no humans around and forever stuck in 1991. Yeah, it sounds like a fucking dream come true to me. It's then up to us to explore the house, collecting enough components to build a spaceship worthy of a 5-minute crafts video and get back home. So, you know how I mentioned how platformers tend to have a main focus or general mechanic that ties the whole experience together? Well, with TinyKin, your main objective is going to be exploration. Not only do you need to explore the different rooms of the house to clear each of their objectives, but 90% of the plot, lore, and enjoyment you'll get out of this game is dictated by how much time you spend seeking each of them out. See, there is still life on this planet. Diverse communities of insects have established their homes here, each species and room having their own rules, struggles, daily routines and jobs. And during our time in the house, we can talk to anyone and every one of them, sometimes revealing side quests for us to tackle, and other times just providing little snippets of the story, helping us piece together what exactly has happened in this house. I can't put my finger on how they've managed this so well, but every room feels incredibly lived in. You very quickly get the sense that these are real villages and communities that have existed here way before we did. It honestly feels like if I turn off the game, these insects will still be there, getting on with their lives and routines with or without us. It's commendable how well they've managed to achieve this in not only such a short space of time, but without hours of cutscenes or countless logs and lost diary entries to catch us up on the different plot threads. I am going to leave that for you to discover on your own though. I know that story is never super in depth with these types of games, but being able to peel back little layers of it on my own just added to the immersion and brilliant world building they've achieved with TinyKin, and I really wouldn't want to take that away from anyone. There's a surprising amount of plot that builds to a much more interesting and even somber ending section than I ever would have thought. Getting back to the game, early on we're introduced to Ridme, who is going to be the one guiding us through this massive new terrain, filling us in on the different areas, introducing us to our moveset and mechanics, and the other big focus of this game, the TinyKin themselves. These teeny weeny creatures will aid us massively with getting about each of the levels. There's a few different colours representing the unique abilities these little dudes possess. The pink ones are capable of super strength, lifting and moving items to complete objectives and open up new pathways. Red have the ability to explode on impact. Yeah, little dark admittedly, but also super helpful to open paths and collect nectar. This game's version of coins or bolts or gems. You're going to use blue to chain electricity to wherever you may need it, yellow to build bridges, and green to create ladders for you to reach areas you couldn't get to before. That's where the puzzle elements come into play, working out what colour TinyKin is best to use in a certain situation, or what combination of them will ultimately solve the riddle. There's going to be a few of you watching this now thinking TinyKin is just ripping off a certain Nintendo IP that has its own cast of miniature multicoloured Martians. I'll be honest, my experience with Pikmin is incredibly limited. I do remember renting it from Blockbuster for a week around the time of its release, but since then it's sat on the shelf of got-to-get-tos for 2 decades now. So I'm not sure how close the mechanics are between the two. But even if TinyKin is just some big stinky ripoff, I really don't care. It doesn't matter where the inspiration came from because they turned it into this incredibly fun and beautiful looking little game. I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed just making my way through this gigantic house in my own time, looking for any corner I can turn over to discover what was hidden beneath. Now I am willing to admit it's a bit weird that exactly half of my videos to date have included the phrase, "I love the whole Honey I Shrunk the Kids gimmick in games." But what can I say? I really do. And TinyKin is by far the best implementation I've experienced. Every object and obstacle is perfectly thought out to make each of the levels as believable as they are fun to explore. It's clear to see how much time and effort was put in by the devs to take everyday items and turn them into incredibly fun level design, even using actual objects in the real world to map out different elements of the levels, ensuring the scale of objects were correct in relation to each other. And that extra effort paid off tenfold. I never got tired of exploring these rooms to see what clever way they'd implemented a TV or a bookshelf or even a bottle top. TinyKin doesn't just feel like a standard platformer that they've lazily thrown a few oversized objects into. The layout of the rooms, the creativity shown with how the levels and its inhabitants' homes are built up, and the sense of scale you get is all masterfully executed. I think one of the things that helps this is the fact that you can always see a majority of the room that you're in. It doesn't matter where you look, there will always be little signs of life or distant platforms waiting for you to eventually navigate to. There's also a massive amount of verticality in the levels, which only adds to the feeling of you being this tiny little guy in this enormous world. It makes a toy castle or a kitchen cabinet feel like this colossal, unconquerable mountain, and it never got old just looking up and seeing a line of nectar in some super distant corner of the room, knowing full well that eventually you'll be able to venture up there and explore even more. Nowhere is off limits, and with enough TinyKin, you'll eventually be able to get to wherever you want. They also did an incredible job just letting you discover things for yourself. There will be these little lines of nectar dotted about that will very gently guide your navigation, but it never felt forced or at all intrusive, and more than anything just works as a nice reminder of where you have and haven't been yet. You as a player get a very similar feeling to Milo himself, being plopped in the middle of this magical world, letting you explore, discover, and make sense of what it contains for yourself. I really loved stuff like the piano that has its own world in sight, with the level's music changing to a version played on a grand piano as soon as you're inside, or the guitar that, when dropped into, reveals a tiny little live music venue with a band on stage and accompanying music. Moments like this would always make me stop in place just to take the world I've stumbled upon in for a few more seconds. And even more subtle things like the insects' homes being cleverly built out of straws, popsicle sticks, and bottle tops. I spent way too much time just slowly admiring the different ways they'd fleshed out these environments. I think another testament to how well they handled the level design is our incredibly simple moveset. Milo can do a short jump and a glide with a soap bubble, and that's it. We'll gain bubbles for collecting enough nectar in each room, allowing us to glide for a little longer and reach even more areas. But there's no need for double jumps, side flips, or wall jumps here. And even with such a restricted moveset, traversal was still an absolute pleasure. Oh yeah, and the soapboard of course. Please do this in more games. Just give me a skateboard. Like, I don't even care if it makes sense in context of the game, just give me one. It makes traversal infinitely more fun. You're going to be a lot quicker on flat ground obviously, but you'll also unlock these silk strings as you make your way around, essentially making shortcuts that you can grind on to get back to higher areas whenever you want. I spent way more time than I'd like to admit pretending this was Tiny Hawk, planning out and skating these different little lines. It all just meshed perfectly with that playful and imaginative side TinyKin does so well, reminding me of being a kid with a tech deck, using anything I could find around the house to make the sickest of skate ramps and rails. So if you can't already tell, I really do love this game. It's one of those ones that you go into not expecting too much from, only to find yourself 6 hours deep and completely immersed in its world. I think TinyKin shows that sometimes simplicity, when handled properly, can work amazingly well. There's no in-depth movement or mechanics, but traversal and exploration is incredibly fun. There's no crazy graphics and effects, but you still get beautifully realised landscapes to discover, bursting with life and detail crammed into every inch. There's no 5-minute cutscenes or endless lore to uncover via tedious collectibles, but still an intriguing and engaging plot for you to piece together in your own time. TinyKin doesn't do anything super in-depth, but instead a few simple ideas that they executed perfectly, and that translated into an incredible and memorable little experience. It's available on basically everything, so go grab it, explore this delightful little game, and spend a bit of time uncovering the answers to its world for yourself. For full transparency, I really wasn't going to talk about Yooka-Laylee in this video. Out of everything we've played today, this has had the most eyes on it, the most conversations around it, the most video essays deep diving into every aspect of it, and the most scathing reviews and people jumping to its defences, ready to die on some pretty questionable hills. I seen the hype, I seen the hate, I played it for myself a few years back, I platinumed it, I enjoyed most of my time with it, and then I just kind of moved on with my life. I didn't have any strong opinions on it, and although I do believe the outrage over its existence was completely overblown, I do also understand how certain elements of its design and gameplay could be frustrating, or even just a little disappointing to those that were excited to jump into a spiritual successor of a childhood classic. But with that said, releasing in 2017, Yooka-Laylee was one of the first games to kickstart the 3D platformer revival, so I think it more than deserves its place in this video, especially considering its history. For anyone who doesn't know what the hell I've been going on about for the last few minutes, let me very quickly catch you up on about 40 years of plot. So, Rare was a British studio founded in 1985 that heavily contributed to the childhoods of Nintendo kids throughout the 90s. With games like Donkey Kong 64, GoldenEye 007, Diddy Kong Racing, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and of course Banjo-Kazooie under their belts, you knew the appearance of that shiny gold emblem at launch meant you were in for a good time. But as the cost of video game development continued to rise, and with a good relationship with Nintendo already built, Rare just asked Nintendo to buy the company. Nintendo was all like, nah fam, forcing Rare to look elsewhere. After a little back and forth bidding war between Activision and Microsoft, the dotted line would get signed by Microsoft in late 2002, to the tune of about $400 million. Over the next few years, Rare would unfortunately have a pretty turbulent time under Microsoft, in terms of the public's reception to their games. They did see some success with games like Viva Pinata and Perfect Dark Zero, but a few less favourable moments with games like Grab by Ghoulies and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. People really hated this one. They also seen a lot of staff leaving the company during this time, and whether or not that had anything to do with Microsoft's acquisition, I'm not entirely sure. But what I do know is, in 2014, a group of ex-Rare employees banded back together to form Playtonic Games, hoping to recapture whatever it is their games lost along the way. I did already touch on them quickly during Demon Turf, but that was Playtonic Friends, the publishing side of the company. Yooka-Laylee was the developer's debut, and after a massively successful Kickstarter campaign, they set their sights on creating a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie a lot of people had been pining for. And then shit went wild. A fucking sandstorm of overreactions, negative reviews and internet arguments ensued. Yeah, some of it completely understandable and warranted, and trust me, I really do have my own issues with this game. I'm just not trying to cuss out the developer's entire bloodlines over it. Anyway, we should probably just start the game at this point, and I apologise to anyone who already knew all of that, but I just think the history helps add a little context to why there were such high expectations of Yooka-Laylee. As we said, it's essentially the modern day equivalent of Banjo-Kazooie, this time pairing up a chameleon and a bat as they try to take down the evil capitalist villain, Capital B, a big B who sucked up all the literature in the world just to get his hands on Laylee's magical book, leaving us to explore a few different theme worlds in order to track down all the pages, or pages as this game calls them, putting an end to the B's diabolical plan once and for all. It's a super simple but goofy enough plot to set the scene for the game's world and the array of wacky characters that inhabit it. Speaking of characters, I really do love the designs of pretty much all of them, excluding the terrifying fridge face that now fuels my insomnia. But our main duo are cute and colourful, closely matching the same style we've seen with a lot of our anthropomorphic favourites growing up, with our moveset cleverly being built off of the different traits of the animals. Yooka will use his tongue for picking up butterflies for health, grappling to specific points, or even absorbing the properties of different things around the levels. Picking up honey to become sticky, or cannonballs to become heavy. And Laylee will use her sonar to trigger different things around the world, using her wings to help us glide in the air and eventually even giving us the ability to fly around. The supporting cast is just as good, with our main villain being this bulbous bee with crooked teeth and a sharp pointed nose. Absolutely looking like Gru with some face paint, but still matching his personality perfectly. You'll find a massive mix of characters to interact with in each of the levels too, like the skeleton explorer Clara Lost, a retro game-loving dinosaur Rextro, an old minecart Kartos, and most importantly of all, Trouser, the slightly sketchy salesman snake who will provide or sell us most of our additional abilities. And yes, he's a snake called Trouser. A trouser snake. Yeah, it's a dick joke. The game is filled to the brim with puns, so if that's not your kind of humour, you're probably going to find most of the character interactions pretty cringy. But for me, I think it suits the world that we're living in. I mean, if you're going to have an environment where basically everything has googly eyes on it, you really should be expecting a fat pig called Sir Scoffs-a-Lot to pop up along the way. The characters are dated in a certain way, but I think that's the point. This really is trying to recapture a similar feeling we got when first exploring Spiral Mountain. I love the characters and I enjoyed a lot of the writing and humour, but one thing I cannot stand is the dated way in which we receive that writing. I hated it in the 90s when it was a necessity due to the limitations of that era, and I hate it even more now that we have so many better options available. Unfortunately, it meant that after the first hour of enduring them, I just ended up trying to button bash my way through sections of dialogue, missing out on the writing and jokes that they obviously put time and effort into. I love the characters, but just hate the interactions with them, and this theme of love and hate carried on through multiple aspects of Yooka-Laylee. Take Ivory Towers for example. After getting through the intro dialogue and exploring the small opening area to test our moveset, we make our way to what will be the hub area of the game in Ivory Towers. But this place is gigantic. Not only does it contain the entry points to all of the game's other worlds, but also its own platforming challenges, enemies to fight, and pages to collect. 20 of them. For context, each of the other worlds only contain 25 each, so you can see how large this hub world actually is. It's also incredibly confusing with all the different paths and routes you'll need to remember to make your way between worlds. I get why it's laid out like this, because you'll need to use certain abilities to access different parts to progress to later levels. And although you can unlock shortcuts to make navigating around the tower a little quicker, it was still confusing and pretty cumbersome to make your way around. They could have easily alleviated this frustration by providing a fast travel between the different worlds. The players who want to see and collect everything are still going to spend time exploring every inch of the tower to sniff out those pages. And the players that are just trying to get by with the bare minimum aren't going to suddenly be converted to completionists by being forced to constantly navigate back and forth this huge hub world. They could have even made it so that the fast travel was only available once you'd entered that world for the first time, so everyone is still experiencing Ivory Towers, but it would have made collectible cleanup that much more seamless. It's not the biggest deal in the world, I know, but it's just another thing that gets added onto the why did they do it like this list. So what about the levels that the hub world is actually leading to? Well, you get two versions of each of the worlds. A smaller version with a set number of objectives when first unlocking it, with the option to then expand the world for a set number of pages, opening up new paths, areas, enemies, and objectives to again collect even more pages. It's kind of an odd choice to do it like this because it's not massively altering the level like you would see with each new visit in Super Mario Sunshine, but instead just kind of unlocking more of the same. The team said they took this approach to not overwhelm players with the massive level size. You can kind of get used to the level's layout before expanding it further, but even the base versions of these levels are massive to begin with, to a detriment to be honest. I'm absolutely fine with big levels if the space is used effectively, but there's a lot of areas in Yooka-Laylee that are just massive stretches of nothing, making us run or swim for far too long between each of the level's objectives. Especially considering the only way to move quickly is with our roll, that for some reason they decided to limit our use of with a special move meter. Yeah, just put it on the list.
I mean, the expandable aspect is a fine idea and I don't think it creates any real issues. It just doesn't add all that much or is all that effective in creating less overwhelming levels. I would have much rather seen them focus on creating smaller, more densely packed levels that were much more fun to traverse.
Apart from the size and spacing of the levels, I enjoyed most of my time with each of the worlds that we do get. They provide a nice mix of environments that are both visually unique and interesting, whilst also providing a bunch of different characters that match whatever area we're in. As we said, in each world we're tasked with collecting 25 pages. Some are dotted around randomly, needing us to complete a puzzle, some platforming, or just using one of our abilities to obtain. And others will need us to interact with the different characters to receive and then complete tasks for them. You're also going to get a Rextro level, a minecart course, a Dr. Puzz transformation task, and a boss battle in every world. I do like the fact that there's a good mix of gameplay styles to try out, which keep the levels a little more engaging. Plus, it's nice that to complete the game, you won't need to collect every page in every level, giving you a little room to skip any that you're struggling with or any that just aren't that fun to play. Looking at you, Kartos. I found the general platforming to be where Yooka-Laylee was at its best. We get a pretty fun moveset to mess about with and normal traversal was always smooth. But again, that love-hate comes into play. Outside of running, jumping, rolling on flat ground and some light combat that all felt great, any other time you control Yooka turns into a bit of a mess. Like you can zip to grappling points with your tongue, but they give no indication of when you're locked on. And it seems like you have to be aiming dead center for it to work, which takes all the fluidity out of that mechanic. The swimming control is a complete dog shit, the flying is incredibly floaty and pretty difficult to control with any accuracy, and don't even get me started on rolling up slopes. The boss battle in the first area has to be one of the most frustrating sections of a 3D platformer I've ever played. You have to roll up a slope avoiding logs to reach the top before attacking, and I'll hold my hands up and say it may just be a me issue, but I could not get the hang of this section. Constantly smashing into logs only to slide all the way back down to the bottom. Unable to jump while sliding, so just smashing into more unavoidable logs on the way down. It's infuriating. Moments like this were far too common during my playthrough and led to as much frustration as it did fun. The annoying Kartos sections where the camera is way too close, the massive environments that were a chore to navigate, or the casino level that, although I really enjoyed visually, needs you to complete a boring slot machine minigame over and over and over again. For every beautifully imaginative character, fun platforming section, or unique ability to try out, there's an odd design choice or frustrating mechanic that sours the experience. I wouldn't say it's a forgettable game, just a game that leaves a lot to be desired. Ultimately, I feel like Yooka-Laylee achieved its goal of creating a 3D platformer that feels like it came straight from the early 2000s, but not always for the right reasons. It's filled to the brim with the same charm that made us fall in love with games of that era, but is filled just as full with the frustrations that made the world move on to other things.
Yooka-Laylee really could have been an awesome game, and as much as it pisses me off to no end with some of the decisions they made with it, I still like it for what it is, a huge colourful throwback to a simpler time in gaming. I just wish they'd updated some of what it does to be more in line with games that we're getting 20 years after this one's main inspiration.
Give us the wacky characters, give us these huge colourful environments, give us the googly eyes and endless puns, but just pair that with the performance, control and polish that could have made this something really special. I'm still excited to see what Playtonic can achieve moving forward in the 3D platformer space, and I really hope the reaction to this one didn't tarnish the genre for them. Who knows, with a little luck, we may still see an improved adventure with Yooka-Laylee soon. Like a majority of games in this video, A Hat in Time draws a massive amount of inspiration from a bunch of older games. In particular, the GameCube era, and more specifically, Super Mario Sunshine. And it's really not afraid to wear that inspiration on its sleeve. Or hat. But instead of taking those classic games and just trying to replicate them exactly, problems included, A Hat in Time takes what made those games so good and builds upon them to provide us with an experience that feels so familiar, but so new and exciting at the same time. The game is a super colourful 3D platformer collectathon with a touch of terrifying survival horror. Yeah, really. Being developed by Gears for Breakfast after putting up their Kickstarter campaign with a pretty small ask of $30,000. Instead, seeing an outpouring of support and managing to raise nearly $300,000. After a few delays, A Hat in Time would hit PC in 2017, with console editions coming a little later and finally a Switch port releasing in 2019. The game puts us in control of Hat Kid, and as we're travelling through space, we're confronted by a mafia member who insists we must pay the toll. When Hat Kid refuses, he smashes open the door to our ship, scattering our timepieces, the spaceship's source of fill, all over this strange planet. It's then up to us to follow the familiar formula of exploring a few different themed worlds that A Hat in Time calls chapters, tracking down enough timepieces to power our ship and finally get us back home. Right off the bat, the game just oozes charm. From the incredible title screen, to our cute but deadly protagonist and her fun animations, the unique hand-drawn illustrations we get before each act, our hub world that's full of little secrets to find, including a text-based corgi adventure, and even the incredibly confusing but more than welcome inclusion of the bloody mafia. The first 5 minutes does a great job of building up this weird but wonderful adventure we're about to join Hat Kid on. The way progression works here is pretty linear, similar to Mario Sunshine, where we have a hub area leading to different worlds with a set number of levels in each, with most levels changing something about the environment with each new visit. I do think this approach creates a few different pros and cons, which I'll touch on a little later, but for the most part, I really enjoyed the way we progress through the game. They mix up each new level so much that I never knew what to expect with each visit. You could be tasked with something as simple as delivering a few letters to the world's inhabitants, but then another act will see us getting caught in the middle of two feuding directors needing us to solve a murder mystery on a train. There really are some unique levels to explore, and whilst each chapter has its own setting and story, the objectives, gameplay styles, and even difficulty would change dramatically with each new visit, resulting in a really fun playthrough that always felt super engaging. But getting back to our first area for now, we're welcome to Mafia Town, a town filled with, well, the Mafia. It's a large open level that will have us focusing on traversal and exploration instead of precise platforming. providing the perfect opportunity to explore the controls and get comfortable with our moveset. It's actually very reminiscent of Delfino Plaza with the oceanside town, the rooftop running and tightrope jumping, just with more Mafia members. In general, the game puts a big focus on our movement, and we're provided with a lot of fun ways to make our way around. It's not the biggest or most in-depth moveset, but what we do have is easy to understand and incredibly satisfying to get comfortable with. We get the expected double jump, but can pair that with our dive move, acting as both a way to get distance by jumping out of a dive, but also giving us the ability to control that distance by quickly cancelling the dive by jumping to stop in place in the air. This makes landing on smaller platforms or making sure you don't overshoot jumps incredibly smooth. Hat Kid can also do a little run up walls when landing on them, which will allow you to pull yourself up if you've landed a little short. We're also going to get access to a grappling move by equipping a badge for it. Badges can be purchased from this weird glitchy guy for Pons, this game's collectible currency that you'll find basically everywhere. The badges act like little power-ups, allowing you to equip any 3 at one time. These can be super useful, like the hover badge that will automatically pull out an umbrella before hitting the ground, the no bonk badge that allows us to dive into walls without bonking them, or the magnet that will pull pawns to you from a short distance. And then you'll get a few less useful but still fun inclusions like the one-hit hero badge causing you to die in one hit, and the mumble badge that will change all of the character's speech into those annoying little grunts and groans Banjo-Kazooie style.
Me, mo, ho, me, oh, yeah.
When putting all of this together, it really does create some beautifully fluid movement that not only made general traversal feel amazing, but after some practice will allow us to chain a bunch of these different moves together to zip across the levels, putting all of that to the test in some of the later levels that will need us to perform way more precise platforming, as well as these platforming challenge levels we get access to through time rifts. Yeah, I really wasn't lying about them being anything but shy about the Mario Sunshine influence. The only other thing I wanted to mention about our moveset is the light combat. A few one-hit enemies dotted around that we can dispatch with a single melee hit is sort of a staple of the genre at this point, and it's fine here. My only issue was that we're able to do a homing attack by jumping before pressing the attack button, and they use this as sort of a traversal mechanic in a few levels. But there was just something about it that always felt a little clunky to use. I was never confident that the game would actually register it, and there were a few instances where it wouldn't and I'd just fall into a bottomless pit. I think the rest of our movement is so smooth and fluid that this just stuck out to me a lot more. But the game's called A Hat in Time and our protagonist Hat Kid, so what's the deal? Well, another major mechanic of A Hat in Time is indeed our hats. We'll collect balls of yarn throughout the game which we'll use to make a few different hats, each providing a different ability when worn. Our default hat will show the direction of the next timepiece, the sprint hat makes us faster, allowing for longer jumps, the brewing hat allows us to throw potions to kill enemies and blow up barrels for collectibles or to open up paths, the ice hat gives us a ground pound move but is also used on these different springboards to make our way to areas we couldn't without it. The Dweller's Mask will show us and allow us to interact with hidden objects or platforms, and finally, the Times Top hat that, well, I'll be honest, I had no idea was in the game until I checked the names of each of the hats when writing this, but says it gives us the ability to temporarily stop time. Clues in the name, I guess. There was nothing super intrusive about using the hats, and switching between each of them is really fast, so it never kills that fluid movement. They balance the mechanic well by not needing you to constantly be thinking about or switching between the different hats. For me personally, I would normally just leave the sprint hat on because I enjoyed the faster movement, and then would just quickly switch to another whenever needed. It also does give us a bit of a reason to explore the levels as much as possible to find tokens that we can use to unlock different hat fliz. These are purely cosmetic, but it was always fun to see the different variants of each hat and just gives a good excuse to go out of your way in search of them.
So I'm just going to quickly circle back to the pros and cons of how we tackle the different levels.
As I said, I really do love the fact that the environments and gameplay change so drastically with each new visit, providing a different objective in each instead of just throwing us in and needing us to collect a set number of items in that world. In Mafia Town alone, we're going to be beating a mini-boss, platforming our way around the town whilst the floor is lava, beating a bigger boss, and then covering ourselves in mud to scare the Mafia away. And all of these were great. My only issues with how the levels work is that sometimes the objectives we do get feel a little underwhelming. For an example I mentioned earlier, our third area will see us travel into this dark, spooky forest, where we'll meet one of the best characters in the game, the Snatcher. We'll need to sign different contracts with him to unlock each of the acts. One of them needing us to explore this creepy old manor, introducing some light stealth mechanics as we sneak around hiding from Vanessa, this terrifying demon woman who owns the house, who, I'm not ashamed to say, caught me off guard and briefly put the shits at me. It was just so unexpected when the rest of the game up to this point was basically nothing but adorable. But my point is, this level is really engaging, needing us to do a few different things to eventually collect the timepiece. But in that same chapter, we'll need to deliver a few letters to some NPCs around the world. And then that was it. I honestly thought this was step one of a few steps we'd need to complete, but nope. You deliver the letters for a few minutes or so, and the timepiece is yours. Admittedly, it's not really a big issue, but it was my only one small gripe with the whole game. And I just think that because a majority of the levels are so fun and unique, it stands out a little more when one or two just aren't as creative as some of the others. The rest of the level design is fantastic though.
I was going to talk about a few of my favourites here, but realised I don't really want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't played it yet.
They've done such an incredible job of building up these wonderful little worlds to explore. And despite the game only really having 4 main chapters, because of how different each act in those chapters can be, it felt like we get much more than we actually do on paper. Visually, the game is a little basic in places, with some spots looking like they came straight from that GameCube era. And I'm not sure if that was the intentional art style to more closely emulate the games that inspired it, or more to do with the limitations of having a small development team. But I still think it works in context of the whole package. A Hat in Time still has some beautiful environments, amazing character designs, and a lot of fun writing and humour. It also has some really awesome music throughout too. From these huge orchestral pieces, to some more whimsical and subtle backing tracks, to these super intense electronic boss fight melodies. The characters were all incredibly charming, excluding Vanessa, and most have super over the top but brilliant voice acting. Again, the Snatcher was a real highlight. But even the Mafia, with their always sounding slightly confused dialogue,
It's awkward for Mafia. Mafia not sure what to do.
and our best friend turned mortal enemy Mustache Girl, with her Saturday morning cartoony voice.
So what'd you say? Wanna join my little rebellion?
I think A Hat in Time stands out from the pack purely with its polished and fun as hell movement that so many games like this manage to stumble on, and I'd recommend checking it out for that alone. But if that's not enough to sell you on it, the sackfuls of charm and personality it's managed to squeeze into its runtime should. And on top of that, just the variety we get during our playthrough is worth your attention. Yeah, we're used to seeing Grass World, Water World, Fire World, Spooky World, but when's the last time we've seen Mafia World, Murder Mystery World, and Rooftop Parade World?
A Hat in Time, despite its unique characters and imaginative settings, doesn't do anything to massively innovate the 3D platformer genre, but still provides us with an experience that kind of feels like it does.
It's one of the few games that have come out over the last few years that has captured that special spark its influences ignited, whilst leaving out all of those little limitations and odd choices so many of them included. It is very upfront with those influences, but really does do enough to stand on its own, never feeling like a Mario or a Banjo or an insert any classic 3D platformer here clone. And I really do think it will stay on the list of great 3D platformers for years to come, especially with the mod community that's rallied behind it on PC.
There's still so much I didn't talk about with A Hat in Time today, because this is one that really is best experienced firsthand. It surprised me, it made me laugh, it scared the shit out of me, but most importantly, it was just a fantastic time from title to credits.
If you are a fan of the genre you're watching a 90-minute video on, or just super into hat-based gameplay I guess, go grab it for yourself and see what's left to discover in the charming little world of A Hat in Time. So I'm not entirely sure how, when or why our 3D platformers went from cute crocodiles and limbless Frenchmen to hellfire and demons. But regardless, welcome to Hellpie, a disgustingly grotesque but devilishly fun 3D platformer brought to us by Sluggerfly, a small German studio who are responsible for Ben and Ed. A really fun little game that I actually played on this channel nearly a decade ago when I was making Let's Plays.
You fucking...
Outside of a follow-up DLC for Ben and Ed, Hellpie is the studio's second full game. Releasing in 2022, we take control of Nate, the admittedly adorable demon of bad taste. During his usual 9-to-5 grind, Nate is asked to collect the ingredients needed for a special birthday pie, the recipient of which is none other than the devil himself. To achieve this, Hellpie will see us venturing off to faraway worlds to explore the lands and collect said ingredients, bumping into a bunch of wacky characters along the way. This gives us the familiar concept of a bunch of themed levels, all of which will include a few different objectives, some platforming challenges, and a few collectibles to keep an eye out for. The setup basically describes every game under the 3D platformer banner, but the thing that sets Hellpie apart from the rest is just how far they took the gross and mature aspects of the game, even managing to get himself banned in Australia and New Zealand.
How'd you get down here? Just waiting for a mate.
I use the term mature incredibly loosely here though. There's an absolute abundance of fart, poo and dick jokes scattered through every inch of Hellpie. It's offensive for the sake of being offensive, but for me personally, as childish as some of the sources of comedy can get, I enjoyed a lot of the humour, visual gags and bizarre plot threads we encountered during our playthrough. Yeah, that probably says more about me than the game, but if you're someone who grew up watching early South Park and similar shows, nothing here is going to be all that shocking to you. If you are used to your platformers being slightly more cutesy though, this one is definitely going to be a little different from the norm. Blood, poo and other slightly creamier biological materials are littered everywhere. We'll make our way through sewers fighting literal pieces of shit, traverse through a human meat factory, and we'll even get to travel through this beautiful jungle landscape where the plants and enemies are all little dicks. While some of the ingredients we collect are female hygiene products, body parts and bodily discharges, basically, no matter where you go or what you do in Hellpie, there's going to be something that would cause you to frantically try and hide the TV screen if your mum was to walk in the room. With that said, they never go too far with anything being actually offensive to most though. And even though the subject matter can get pretty grim, nothing shown on screen is something I ever had to look away from or felt especially grossed out by. The only thing that really springs to mind is the depiction of some religious figures, even getting us to boss battle against the hands of God, which, although aren't something that offend me personally, I know could be frowned upon by some. But I mean, the game has hell in the title, right above an image of a demon chained to a naked cherub, so the warning signs really were there from the start.
For me, the different jokes, ingredients, and self-awareness of how stupid and childish everything can get often brought a chuckle out of me during my playthrough.
And Hellpie really does all it can to revel in its own absurdity. Things like Steve Jobs' signature turtleneck being an unlockable outfit, or an admittedly confusing but more than welcome crossover with Electric Callboy, again giving us a few different collectible outfits. Or even one of the levels turning into a parody of Scarface, concluding with a bizarre but fun as hell third-person shooter. It all melted together to create an experience that, by not taking itself at all seriously, allows you to do the same and just take everything in as it comes. So, as we touched on, we'll be taking control of our little demon dude Nate as we explore a pretty solid series of different themed open worlds. We'll start off in Hell that will act as both the hub world to access each area of the game, as well as a nice way to get accustomed to Nate's moveset. Things are going to start off pretty simple with little more than your expected double jump and dash, but during a trip to Hell's local grocery store, we're introduced to and joined by Nugget, a little enslaved cherub that we chain to our wrist. Nugget is going to open up that base movement a fair bit by allowing us to use him as a sort of grappling hook, and this is where most of the fun, fluid movement is going to come from. We can hold the right trigger whilst mid-air to swing from Nugget, and this is great to add distance both vertically and horizontally to our jumps, but is also just insanely fun to use. We'll start off with just a single swing, but as we progress through the game, we're going to be able to power up our little Nugget and get access to a few more swings before needing to touch the ground, allowing us to cover a massive amount of distance while still in the air. Like I said, the movement of this feels incredible, and right off the bat it's slippery smooth and natural to use. It's actually really interesting to have the mechanics of a grappling hook without the limitations of needing somewhere to attach it to, or even the game just limiting where you can and can't use it. And with such massive levels for you to make your way through, it made both traversal and exploration fast, snappy, and a lot of fun. In a similar way to Whiplash, a game I played in a past video, we're also going to be able to use our chain cherub Nugget as a living weapon, violently swinging him around to attack. But outside of smashing boxes for gems, a few one-hit enemies dotted around, and the occasional boss fight, combat never attempts to become the main focus of Hellpie, but that really was for the best. What you see is what you get here, a super over-the-top gross platformer, and it seems like they put a lot of thought into creating fun and effective movement to make exploration as enjoyable as possible, and I think they definitely achieved that. It's simple to understand, super smooth, easy to chain together, and with some smart little additions like Nate being able to claw up walls for a short distance, or this little upward swing you can do with Nugget from a standstill, making it easy to get to any areas you thought may be slightly out of reach. Within 15 minutes or so of starting the game, you're going to be bouncing around the first world effortlessly.
The movement actually reminds me of a Hat in Time in a way. Not in terms of the actual mechanics, but just in terms of a moveset that, although isn't massive or particularly complex, is well thought out and provides us with the freedom to tackle traversal in whatever way we see fit.
But I think Hellpie actually manages to show off that great movement even more thanks to its massive levels. Each of the worlds we get are pretty huge, with most leading to some smaller areas you can access by taking on different objectives given by various NPCs. These will usually be more linear platforming sections, but that slight difference in gameplay is what keeps it so interesting. The larger hub worlds are for exploration, finding collectibles, and generally just messing about with the movement, and then these smaller, more linear areas are where you can test that movement by taking on some more challenging platforming. And as big as the different worlds are, they were never boring to make our way through. The game does a great job of making it feel like there's always something to see or do in any direction. You will always be on the lookout for something whilst making your way around. Whether it's gems to unlock costumes, food to upgrade Nugget, hidden cats that will usually need us to complete some trickier platforming, or even these adorable as hell Unilambs that the game will force you to violently sacrifice to unlock new horns, providing Nate with a few unique abilities.
And I know I said there was nothing in Hellpie that was actually difficult to look at. I've now just realised that I absolutely lied to you all, and this little button bashing game is in fact incredibly disturbing.
You f***ed up for this one, Hellpie. At least this sacrifice isn't for nothing though, and will indeed provide horns that will help us out massively during our playthrough. The sprint horns provide a burst of speed, the ram horns allow us to break specific objects for collectibles, the light horns allowing us to see in areas we couldn't without them, the arm horns that will attach to specific zip lines for shortcuts around the different worlds, and finally the wing horns that will give us the ability to glide through the air. You can switch between these at any time once unlocked, and again, they were never intrusive to the gameplay, but were just another nice addition to an already super fun moveset.
You've heard me ramble on about how, as long as a character is fun to control, everything else becomes a lot less important.
And Hellpie has done an incredible job of making sure moving Nate from point A to point B is as satisfying as possible. And I really think that's the biggest selling point for this one. From the start of the game to its over-the-top ending, I never got tired of swinging Nugget through the air and zipping around the different worlds. Luckily for us, even though I think its movement is its biggest selling point, it's not its only one, and the game has managed to make pretty much everything else just as good. It's as hideous as it is humorous, but I challenge any of you to press a button on a photocopier and watch on as streams of crudely drawn dick doodles shoot out of it without at least cracking a smirk. Plus, for every gross for the sake of gross moment, there was a visual gag or some character dialogue that got a genuine laugh out of me. It's also got some really varied levels to traverse, both visually and in terms of subject matter. From the expected red glow of Hellfire to this beautifully bright beachside town, a dimly lit city hiding its human meat harvesting to a fluorescent rave in a jungle, and eventually even all the way up to heaven itself. The collectibles have been handled well by never locking you out of progressing whilst you meticulously comb the entire level looking for that last one, but will still reward you for putting in the effort to seek them out. And even the boss battles that, although I don't think do anything particularly special, were always fun and a nice little change of pace from the usual platforming. Putting it all together, it's just an awesome little package that I thoroughly enjoyed my time with, way more than I thought I would. I was slightly concerned going in that the game would edge on the side of style over substance, focusing way too much on the novelty of it all. But that absolutely was not the case here, and instead we're provided with a really solid 3D platformer. If you're a fan of the grotesque, there is absolutely no reason not to give this one some of your time. But even if you're not someone who's thrilled with the idea of bumping into piss and poo at every turn, if you can manage to look past its rotten exterior, there's still a lot of fun on offer here. It's available on everything, so go grab it for yourself, hold your nose, and enjoy a disgusting little dive into Hell Pie.
Whenever I think about 3D platformers, I just naturally envisage some cutesy characters, bright colourful worlds, and a simple plot that concludes with the good guys beating the bad guys and saving the world.
And even though in this video we've played a few games that go against the grain of what's expected from the genre, they still included a few of the more traditional elements. But a few months ago, when partaking in a little late night online shopping, I seen an interesting cover with a cheap enough price tag that swiftly got added to my cart. I didn't really know what to expect when first jumping into it, but was pleasantly surprised to be greeted by a game that has the slick movement mechanics of a 3D platformer, but with the progression of a Metroidvania and the aesthetics, world building and storytelling you would expect from a much darker fantasy adventure. So without further ado, welcome to Blue Fire. And what a welcome it is. This title screen, absolute chef's kiss. It's incredibly simple, but it's the perfect first impression of the game. It makes you feel like you're about to embark on a dark but somewhat beautiful adventure, with this mysterious, foreboding structure floating in place.
It's just such an awesome way to set an interesting scene before we even start the game, and it got me super excited to start piecing together the story of this strange but intriguing world. But what is the game that this title screen is even leading to?
Well, Blue Fire is a self-described dark 3D action-adventure platformer, with a much heavier emphasis on its combat than most in the genre. Releasing in early 2021, the game was developed by Roby Studios, with it being their first and only game release to this point. They have announced their next release, Solar Raiders, but there's not too much information on that at the time of writing this. So starting the game, we're going to awaken in a tube, in a dungeon, in what looks like it could be the same castle structure from the title screen. Upon breaking out, we're quickly introduced to two mechanics that will stick with us for the entirety of our playthrough. The first of these being our movement. I was surprised by just how quick and snappy the control we have over our little dude is. As expected, we will start off with a smaller moveset that we'll constantly be added onto as we progress. But even just our basic jump, dash, and a simple 3-hit combo attack was still enjoyable to mess about with as we get to grips with things in this first area. The dash feels especially good as you'll use it by holding the right trigger, but you'll actually stop in place whenever letting go, so you don't have to spend any time getting used to the distance or speed of the dash. You can just hold the trigger in the air and let go as soon as you're above whatever it is you need to land on. It's one of those smart decisions that you wouldn't complain about or even miss if it wasn't there, but the inclusion of it provides a lot of accuracy and fluidity to our movement. The second mechanic we're introduced to is the storytelling itself. We're going to find a bunch of notes scattered around this opening area, and when reading them, they all seem to imply that either a lot of testing on, or at least the creation of a lot more little guys like us has been going on here. These first few notes will lay the foundation of how a majority of the story in Bluefire will unfold through our playthrough, finding notes, logs, and diary entries that will all slowly reveal little snippets of lore, helping us piece together the puzzle of this long-forgotten world. The rest of the plot we'll get by interacting with the many characters we'll meet along the way, and outside of a single cutscene towards the middle of the game, nothing is spoon-fed to us, meaning if you want to find out as much as you can about what exactly is going on here, you're going to have to explore every nook and cranny of the world, talking to and sometimes even helping anyone you come across. And since there's no map at all, it really is up to you how much time you want to put into uncovering this world's secrets. Personally, I think it's a great way to reward players' exploration, and it was always incredibly satisfying to make our way to a new area and talk to all the different characters to get a sense of not only the area that we're in, but the different lives and routines of those that inhabit it. I really enjoyed a lot of the character interactions, and those little snippets of lore and dialogue we'll get make the side quests that some of them provide feel far more grounded in the larger world. Reuniting an old innkeeper with a lost picture of a past loved one, or a young boy with his mother's necklace. Yeah, the majority just boiled down to fetch quests, but they always felt like little opportunities to flesh out the history of the area you were in. The characters were also a good way to deliver some humour that often felt like little sighs of relief before going back out into the darkness and danger of the rest of the world. Characters like Unari, who left their village because they weren't fans of bunnies and carrot soup, so ventured off to start their own bunny cult, even allowing us to buy a bunny suit ourselves and join the cause. I think Bluefire does a great job of mixing lighter storytelling and funny moments with the overall dark and mysterious plot, so nothing ever got too serious or dramatic, but not too silly and goofy either. And this balance was something that they did a great job with for other elements of the game too. It's very easy to see Bluefire's influences, but they took just enough from each of them and balanced them incredibly well, and each different element fed into another perfectly. I always felt like there was a good reason for doing what I was doing in Bluefire. Rather than just making my way through a bunch of individual levels, I felt like I was always moving forward, pushing the narrative along with me on this adventure.
Honestly, the best way to experience this story is firsthand.
Making your way around the different environments, learning about the characters in their lives, peeling back the plot piece by piece and uncovering the secrets for yourself. It's just so easy to sink into the world of Bluefire, with these beautiful environments that, although aren't these vast, meticulously detailed worlds, are all visually unique with their own styles and colour palettes. And as simplistic as the visuals can get, there were still moments of me just standing in place for a moment to take everything in. These moments were helped massively by the music choices throughout. The soundtrack really is phenomenal. Subtle wind instruments, soft bells and plucked strings set a perfect tone whilst exploring. Never trying too hard to take your attention away from what's happening visually, but instead complementing it perfectly, only ramping up when it was really needed for maximum effect. Occasionally, these soft, haunting female vocals would kick in and, at the risk of sounding a tad dramatic, would make the hairs on my arms stand up.
It's such a beautiful soundtrack that fits the world of Bluefire perfectly, and even if you've got no interest in playing this one for yourself, I would still recommend at least checking out the soundtrack.
I did quickly want to talk more on the movement itself though, because everything we've mentioned about the worlds, the visual and the music are all well and good, but aren't going to be worth as much without the gameplay to back them up. Well, yeah, gameplay is sick though. I already touched on the dash feeling great to use, and that carries over to most other elements of our movement too. It's super easy just to move around the different environments, and there's a really good weight and momentum to everything. It is on the lighter side, but that's more fitting when we're covering the huge distances we can with a few of the later unlocks. Through progression, we'll gain the ability to wall run and wall jump, double jump, and one more additional jump that has a cooldown attached to it. But we're provided with a great base to chain together our movements to really start floating around the different areas. What the game does so well is providing the players with a feeling of freedom, both with the openness of the game and its progression, but with the physical control we have too. I never felt like I was being restricted by the game or its moveset, and after a few hours of playing, I could get to wherever I wanted to just by chaining together a few different moves. This freedom created an incredibly fun playthrough that I really did enjoy start to finish, whilst also providing me with all of the control. So whenever I died or fell, it was because I mistimed a jump or messed something up, rather than the game restricting me. This meant everything felt both fair and incredibly satisfying, especially when it came to the later voids. The voids are these individual platforming challenges that we'll enter throughout the game, with most introducing a different obstacle type, mechanic or gimmick. And although these start off simple enough, they really start to ramp up in difficulty and are a true challenge of how well you can use that fluid movement now that you've had some practice. All in all, I really can't fault anything that Blue Fire has to offer. With any game like this, my main priority is going to be how does it control? How fun is it to move my character from one point to another? And Roby Studios have absolutely nailed that. Whilst the combat gives us far fewer options than our movement, I don't think that's a negative here. It's much more interesting than the usual one-hit enemies, so still required at least a little thought. But outside of the boss battles, it never becomes the main focus by taking too much time away from where a majority of the enjoyment will come from in the platforming. I love how they tell the story and the world that they've built, and whilst I do understand why some are frustrated by the decision to leave out a map, I actually kinda liked getting lost in Penumbra, having to remember my way through its different shortcuts and connecting paths, and I felt much more invested in the world because of it.
I think Blue Fire is a great example of how to take elements from different genres and balance them all perfectly without any of them feeling lazily tacked on or just there for the sake of being a buzzword on the back of a box. And I actually think this could work as a great introduction to a few different genres.
I know a lot of people grow up with 3D platformers, or at the very least are comfortable moving a character around in 3D space. But by providing the players with the lighter elements from various genres, it works as a nice stepping stone towards them. If you enjoyed the world of Blue Fire, why not jump into Hollow Knight? Or if you enjoyed the snappy combat, check out Death's Door. If you enjoyed slowly building up the story of this gloomy world, then maybe try your luck with your first Dark Souls. And even if you've been playing those games for years now, there's still going to be a lot of things to enjoy here. Blue Fire is available on everything, so there's no reason not to give this one a go for yourself and spend some time in its dark but beautiful world. After I finished Blue Fire, it got me thinking about what made it so enjoyable, and the same with many of the other games we've played today. And after some thought, it all comes back to a word that I know you're sick of me saying by now: the movement. Although a lot of these games have a lot of great elements, most of the enjoyment for me was the fluid control we have over our character. And that's just a natural progression we've been seeing in many genres over the last few decades. Yeah, better visuals, frame rates and loading times help too, but it's obvious to see that developers have been tweaking and fine-tuning their movement since Mario gave us that glorious little stick. But another thing I thought about is how we haven't experienced anything today that we haven't already seen in hundreds of platformers over the years. Granted, in a more restricted form with less control and more basic visuals, but for this last game, I wanted to check out something that would have been unimaginable to me growing up on my N64. Welcome to the world of VR, baby! Oh, for fuck's sake. Welcome! As I said, I wanted to check out a game that really is only possible in the current age of gaming. There's no better way to do that than with virtual reality. A platform that for a long time was only possible within sci-fi media and nerdy fantasies. Ven VR Adventure is a 3D platformer collectathon built from the ground up purely for VR. Initially releasing for PC in 2021 before making its way over to PSVR 2, which is the version I'm playing.
There's just a few things I wanted to quickly mention before jumping into it though. The first being, I'm not someone who spent a massive amount of time in VR before.
The PSVR 2 was my first welcome to the world of virtual reality, and even though I did pick it up on launch, it's not something I've spent a whole lot of time with. The second is, I'm obviously capturing the footage from a PS5, but the footage you see is what is broadcast to the TV and not the headset, meaning the colours can get a little funky sometimes, and the field of view is also reduced a fair bit when compared to the real-time view. Just so you can get a better understanding of how it looks, here's the footage you'll be seeing, and here's some footage that more closely resembles what I can see through the headset when playing. Lastly, I didn't realise how obnoxious it is to watch back footage of someone playing in VR. Every little head movement and shake, or every time I randomly turn my head to look at something out of frame is captured. So if it does get too annoying to watch, I completely understand. I'll do my best in the edit to stop you all getting severe migraines.
But I'm not taking any accountability for them if you choose to stay. But with all of that said, let's jump into it.
We're first going to get this short opening cutscene that will fill us in on the plot, which I remembered for about as long as the cutscene actually lasted. The main gist of it is we're the good guy making our way through a bunch of themed levels to reach the big bad, defeating him and saving our home. I think. To be honest, the main thing I remember from the story is the villain's name, but only because it's so funny to me. It's just some guy called Bruce Nelson.
Nelson, what are you doing? Thank you. Whoa! Don't be so weird. Calling him Nelson, you made me laugh at the fact that his name's Nelson. I hadn't picked up on that before.
I'm not sure if he's trying to take over a planet or just talk to us about switching insurance providers.
Hello?
It's obvious from the start that the plot is never going to be something that takes the main stage in Ven, but rather just provides a little bit of motivation for our character as he navigates the different environments. We'll be making our way through 3 different worlds, each containing 4 unique levels, and I really think they did a great job with all of them. There's a lot of different themes to explore that are pretty basic, but always provided a nice backdrop. From the Caribbean-esque opening level to some dense tribal jungles, an industrial wood processing factory to snow-covered mountain tops and icy caves. All of the different themes were awesome to experience in VR, and although there were a few less impressive elements like the super low resolution skybox surrounding everything, the visuals were always nice and clear, bright and colourful, and varied enough to keep everything interesting. With most levels introducing a new enemy or obstacle type to maintain that steady difficulty curve as you get to grips with each of them. To make our way around these levels, we'll be controlling Ven from a third-person perspective, following along from behind. It's very similar to something like Moss that places us in the different environments but from a fixed position, allowing us to freely look around and even lean past different pieces of the environment to search for hidden boxes and collectibles. I think this approach worked really well for a 3D platformer as you have the immersion of a VR game but with the same control you would get from a standard controller. Although it doesn't allow you to interact with the world in unique ways, moving objects around with your hands, it instead allows you to focus fully on your control of Ven. That control does remain pretty simple for the duration though. We move with the left stick, jump and double jump with the X button, and do a simple melee attack with square, with our last move being a ground pound that we can perform by double jumping before pressing the attack button. I'm kind of torn a little on how basic the moveset is though. I think the simplicity is good in terms of it allowing you to completely focus on the platforming, and also works great as a pick up and play title for someone who hasn't played VR before.
Oh my god, what the is that? Ah!
You never have to think about your movement or remember any button combinations, so it's very natural to anyone that's ever held a controller before. But I do still think it would have been nice to have a few additional moves unlock as we progress. Even something as simple as a dodge roll or a projectile attack would have been enough to reward players. But the moveset you get in the first minute of the game is the exact same moveset you finish it with. What they focused on is the obstacles and enemies changing instead, and what starts off super simple will eventually start introducing fast moving saws, falling platforms and faster enemies. Don't get me wrong, it never becomes difficult, but there were still sections of me dying a fair bit and needing to learn the timing and layout of the different obstacles. For the most part, this felt really rewarding and the difficulty or complexity of a level built up at a pretty natural pace. That was until this goddamn massive snake,
There he is, creepy little bitch,
that after defeating in a previous level will have us riding on its back as we as a player physically throw these balls at incoming enemies. that I can pretty confidently tell you are birds with torpedoes attached to them by Nelson. That phrase has been burned into my brain for a week straight.
This is where my limited access to VR becomes a detriment though, because I can't pinpoint exactly why this section is so frustrating.
Every other game I've played where we throw an object, the tracking has always been amazing. Even in this game, when there was a short section of needing us to do the same, the ball would always go exactly where I needed it to.
It's mad you can throw stuff in VR and it's like it knows where you're throwing it.
But no matter what way I tried throwing the ball in this level, they would just fly off in random directions. And you don't really have enough time to correct them when you do. If you miss one, maybe two throws at a push, the birds with torpedoes attached to them by Nelson are going to hit you and send you straight back to the start. The whole section is too long as well, which resulted in a 31-year-old man losing his mind over a game that looks like this. So just enjoy.
I don't know what the best technique is here. Why does he do that? Don't get annoyed. Just don't get annoyed, didn't it? Look at the beautiful world that we're a part of. Let's put it here. This is the technique. Oh, this is not the technique. They're birds with torpedoes attached to them by Nelson. It's losing its comedic value. It's gonna put me all the way back to the start as well. I'm not gonna miss. I'm not gonna miss. I'm not gonna miss. I'm not gonna miss. Mate. Bro. Look at me. Well, it's not you. You are not throwing them. It's me.
To be fair to Ven, this was the only section that I would consider to be bullshitty throughout the game. And even the other minigame section we get with a Beat Saber styled minigame worked perfectly.
Well, this absolutely ramped up to a ridiculous level.
Weirdly, it almost felt a bit nostalgic with the inclusion of frustrating minigame sections in a 3D platformer, which is a feeling I got in a few areas throughout my playthrough. I did try to speak on this whilst playing, but apparently multitasking isn't a strong suit of mine.
It gives me like a similar feeling to that of like when you used to play those like tie-in games as a kid. And I think it was just the fact that it was like I'd use these characters in these worlds that you're so used to playing usually. Oh shit, they fall. Oh shit, they fall.
What I was trying to say is, it just reminded me of playing a movie tie-in game growing up. Being so used to seeing these worlds and characters in their own movies and shows, but then seeing them in a complete different way and being able to take full control for the first time. And that's what Ven felt like to me. When stripping it down, it's a very basic 3D platformer that without the VR aspect would likely fall into the pit of Crash clones from years gone by. But by being in those environments for yourself, freely looking around and being absorbed into each of the levels, it really did give me that same feeling I had growing up. Ven doesn't do anything we haven't already seen in countless 3D platformers before, but instead allows us to see those same things in a completely new way. The genre works incredibly well in VR because I feel like a lot of games that make the move over to the virtual world need you to give up a certain aspect of control for the sake of immersion. But here, you have the exact same control you would on a flat screen, just with the inclusions that elevate the experience. And it's got me hopeful to see more VR platformers that can hopefully push the genre even further.
With that said, do I recommend you go out and buy a VR headset to play Ven? Absolutely not.
As enjoyable as it was, a 4-hour experience isn't going to be able to do enough to sell you on what is an incredibly expensive piece of hardware. But if you do already have access to VR and you're a fan of 3D platformers, except for a small slice of your own sanity,
can I avoid them? Can I avoid them? Can I avoid them?
You have absolutely nothing to lose by jumping into Ven's VR Adventure.
I could have easily spent another hour and a half jumping into even more 3D platformers for this video, but as they say, you can't have too much of a good thing.
I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with the majority of the games we've played today though, and I'm incredibly excited to see what other characters are keeping the 3D platformer dream alive. There's a certain magic in the diversity of how people enjoy things, and there's no right or wrong way to enjoy anything.
I'm certainly not going to sit here at 31 years old and claim that today's youth are missing out. And I don't want to constantly reminisce about the golden age and the good old days, or anything similar that will age me more than my bad back and black bags already do.
But with the never-ending flow of viral games and next big things, battle passes and microtransactions, I do sometimes miss the simplicity.
Do you remember when receiving a game for your birthday or Christmas felt like discovering treasure?
You dive headfirst into its world for weeks on end, uncovering every hidden nook and cranny, joined by characters that were filled to the brim with playful personalities. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of games that achieve that now, and it isn't exclusive to just 3D platformers. But there's something about them that I will always hold incredibly dear. They were my first introduction to console gaming, and after I played Mario 64 for the first time, every other game I touched for a while felt like it was missing that same magic. It's awesome that we've been able to spend time with so many amazing characters and franchises since then, but a small part of me is still a little sad that 3D platformers don't hold the same spotlight they once did. With that said, they have all paved the way for these incredible indie devs to pick up the baton, so to speak. And we're seeing more and more games releasing that are capturing what we loved so much about those games. Whether they're trying to closely replicate the classics, evolving the genre with new mechanics and never before seen gameplay styles, or even just incorporating small elements of 3D platformers that we all know and love. And I think that's the silver lining in having to let go of the days where 3D platformers were king. There's obviously an absolute ton of new 3D platformers that I didn't get to in this video, so if there's any you've played that you've really enjoyed, leave them down in the comments so I can check them out too.
I am going to be checking out a few more super soon, just with a little bit of a twist, but more on that next time. For now, thank you so much to anyone that's made it to this point in the video. I really do appreciate your time and hope you've enjoyed watching. If you have, give it a little like just to let me know. I honestly think achieving a consistent upload schedule is still a bit of a pipe dream for me at the moment, so don't forget to subscribe if you do want to stay up to date with content from me in the future. And as always, I really hope to see each and every one of you in the next video.